All right, ready to go?
Yep.
So how's it going? My name is Sam Friend. I'm the engineer for Taiko recording, and we're going to talk a little bit about the mic setup.
Hey y'all, this is Grady Mayo. I'm going to be chiming in here and there during the studio explanation, just because this video is meant to explain just the Taiko slash microphone setup that we use just for recording low. I mean, this recording setup worked out really well, but with new advice from a few people, including mostly Isaku Kageyama, there's some ideas that I have that I think would improve the recording just for next time. So just get ready for my interruptions here and there.
And what we have for all the drums here, the quad, we essentially have just close miking, which means we're trying to really get an intimate sound. We have these Audix D4s, which are a pretty good mid-range mic that'll pick up a good amount of low end, but enough, punchy articulation to get good close sound. And then we have kind of these, almost looks like a 57, but they're a 56 kind of. We went with them for the smallest drums, and they work well.
So the microphones explained by Sam for close mics, for the Taiko set, for the shime and okedo, they actually worked out really well. So I would gladly use these microphones again for the Taiko set. There are just some things that I'd change. For next time, I'd put up probably some overheads above the whole Taiko set just to capture the whole sound of the entire kit. So probably 2 microphones in A, B, or XY configuration, a foot or 2 above me and the Taiko set just to capture the full sound. Plus, combined with the close mics, I think would have a more full sound of the entire kit. Also, what I like to experiment with is adding actual bottom mics below the drums that are pointed at the opposite head of the batter head, so the head that's not being played on. It might sound strange, but it's used a lot for snare drums and toms in drum sets. But all you'd have to do is just flip the phase, just so they're all phase aligned, just because I think it would add just some extra depth to each of the drums. But that's all I'd change about the Taiko set and setup.
Over here, a Royer 121, which is a ribbon microphone. It's bidirectional, which means it's going to pick up sound this direction and this direction.
So yeah, this mic, the Royer 121, that was just described by Sam, worked out really well in the mixing phase. So it's sort of like a mic that was for both me and Kyle. It was probably about 6 feet away from both of us, just right in between. And again, yeah, he said it was figure 8. So one side was pointed at Kyle and the Odaiko, and the other side was pointed at me and my Taiko set. But it worked as sort of like a mid-proximity microphone. It was too far away to be a close mic, but it was close enough that it wasn't necessarily like a big boomy room mic that was capturing the sound of the room too much. So it was a nice in-between microphone. So that placement works well. If you have multiple drummers and you want to capture everyone playing at the same time, this microphone worked out well in the position that it was in.
When we go over here, the Odaiko, we have a FET 47, which is this kind of thicker mic here. And then we have a 414, a vintage 414.
So this pair of mics for the Odaiko worked out really well for capturing a really low-focused resonant sound. But originally we just had one of these mics. I'm not sure which one set up to record the Odaiko, but when we checked it in the control room, it didn't have quite enough attack or mid-range. So it was Kyle's idea to add the other one right next to it, which helped a little bit, but I still had to add some stuff in the mix, just some more saturation and a little bit more mid-range, just to give it more clarity and a little bit more punch. So there's some things I'd like to change, I think. And again, I got this from Isaku after talking to him and trying out some mic positions. So I'd like to reproduce either this setup or something similar and just have another mic on the other side of where Kyle is, because this microphone setup was behind Kyle's left shoulder, about a foot and a half behind him, but at like a 45-degree angle pointed at the batter head where Kyle's playing. So I'd like to have actually another setup on Kyle's behind Kyle's right shoulder. That way the microphone setups and the batter head together all make like a equilateral triangle. So the distance between the 2 microphone setups and the batter head while Kyle's playing would be equidistant, and that helps with phase and for a better stereo image. Some things I'd like to add though was a close mic either below Kyle's hands or above the drum, sort of suspended with like a high boom stand. and just to capture a little bit more high end. But what I found out when talking to Isaku is the closer we got with the microphone to the head, we actually got a lot more low end, which was surprising because I thought it would be a lot more of an attack, but that's not how it worked. But I want to see if that was because we were pointing the microphone into the center of the drum or like inward of the drum, which I think we got more of the boominess of it. So I think switching it so it's more parallel with the head, or like the drum head plane. That way it's going across the drum head rather than into the drum head. So wherever it is, either below Kyle's hands or above it, it would just go across the drum head. And I think that might be better for capturing sort of like the high end attack when the bocce hits the drum head. Also, another position that worked out well when I was talking with Isaku about some of this stuff is adding maybe like a large diaphragm dynamic microphone, like a Electro Voice RE20 or something like that, to the opposite head that's not being played, so the resonant head, but putting it to where it's centered on the drum and it's pointed inward at a perpendicular angle. Because what we found was anywhere else sort of on the resonant head, it would have like a really wobbly sustain after you hit it, so it'd sound like wow, 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 wow after you hit it. But if you put it right in the center, you get more like a clear, stable sustain, like a dong, which I liked a lot better. Personally, it's kind of a taste thing, but that's how it would change the Odaiko close mic setup.
Now, if we move over here, we wanted to try this RCA ribbon mic 77, but ended up not using that one so much. But we found over here in this little spot, there was an insane amount of low end. Okay, just the bass buildup over here was kind of immense. So we put one right in here. We just kind of walked around. We found a spot in the room that sounded, the biggest. And we just put a microphone right where our ears were. Then we have a Neumann 149 or an M49? M149, right. And essentially this is picking up the room. So, in theory, we're just trying to get a good combination of close miking and some accent mics around the room to kind of blend in there so we get a little bit of the room, but primarily we're focusing on the close miking. And since we are in a big room, it's going to be hard to avoid getting the room in there.
For next time, I think I want to go for a room that's a little bit smaller and a little bit more controlled, because this room sounded like really nice, but it was a little bit too reflective, a little bit too reverberant in some areas of the room. It still sounded nice, but I think I like the more intimate sound of a smaller room with a little bit better audio absorption. However, the room mics that he just described did work out well. There was a lot of them, but we just had to be careful about which ones we picked, just so the low end specifically wouldn't clash with each other. So I kind of had to pick and choose and manipulate stuff in the mixing phase, just so it wasn't just all low end and all rumble. I wanted to have more clarity, so I did like where the room mics were put. But again, just the different close mic combinations that I described earlier, I think would help a lot in terms of clarity and getting a full sound out of the drums, and then adding the room mics just for that extra space and everything.
So we're focused on the close sound because that's what they wanted, and we have the rooms to, essentially blend in there. What we're using here, we have some outboard gear that we're using, but they're really just primarily mic pre's, so mic preamps that we are just amplifying the sound. We're not running any compressors in line. We're not doing a whole lot of stuff. We're trying to really just capture it as raw as possible. But we have, a couple of the Neve 1073s on a couple of the mics, like the ribbons. We have these the SSL. Couple of preamps, then we have the BAE, which is kind of similar. It's their version of the Neve. We are also using just the board preamps, which Rob, tell us a little bit about the console.
So the console is it's an AMEC Recall. It's a 90s actually live console. But the MX line is really nice. They have a lot of studio consoles, and they've done actually some collaboration with Rupert Neve with the preamps. Anyway, very nice, very clean, very punchy sounding console. The preamps are really warm. They get plenty of transient response and just have a really nice overall character, a decent amount of headroom. So we actually didn't use any EQs, even though every channel has an EQ on it. And yeah, we just ran straight in and out the direct outs and just recorded that way for the cleanest signal path possible, really.
So we got 47 tracks to capture everything, and it's really a combination. Like, we add the mics and then we duplicate them, so it's not all of those at one time, but that's what the session is. And but pretty much it's just a tape machine. We're not really mixing or processing anything in the computer yet. It's pretty much just everything, microphone, them playing, going straight in, and just us using our ears of placement to get the sound.
Another thing that I'll probably do next time, this might help out anyone else who wants to do a Taiko recording, is to actually compare your Taiko sounds to ones that are already recorded on maybe some of your favorite Taiko recordings, like Kaoru Watanabe's Neo record. That one is probably my favorite. It sounds really intimate, and the drums just sound huge, and the mixing and everything and the playing is great. But besides that, Isaku Kageyama's Taiko recordings sound really clean, and also I like a lot of On Ensemble's recordings as well. So those are just some suggestions to compare your Taiko sounds to. Okay, so now this is the mixing portion of the big Taiko section in low, just to show y'all basically what we did in this recording session. I just want to start off saying, I'm not a professional. I'm not a professional mixer or master engineer or anything like that. But I just wanted to give a little bit of tutorial, like in the box. There's not too many things online or on YouTube showing some things, so hopefully this helps a little bit. This screen, it might look really complex tricks and stuff I did to mess with the sounds. So there's a lot of tracks here, but a lot of them are barely used, so it's kind of messy right now. I could clean it up a little bit, but this is the position where we're in. And so what you see is basically in this top area is a lot of the taiko that we tracked. And we kind of did it in a different way, where in the song it kind of goes between written, like very specifically written sections, and then transitioning into an odaiko solo, then back into a written section, odaiko solo, so on and so forth. Some more stuff that we added, like a taiko set solo on its own, and then a taiko set with odaiko, or taiko set soloing on top of odaiko, and then going back into an odaiko solo. So there's a lot of stuff that's written and a lot of stuff that's improvised here. So how we basically approached the recording is basically on all the written sections, for the most part, we, on our own, just played to the metronome and then layered the other person on top of it. And then when we went into improv section or a solo section, we basically had the metronome turned off, and we, together in the same room, mostly Kyle soloing, improvising over me on taiko set. and then transitioning back into a written section again with metronome, just so we kind of got that feeling of looseness a little bit. So the written sections sound a little bit tighter and a little bit just locked in terms of tempo, but solo sections that were improvised were allowed to be a little bit more expressive and dynamic, since we didn't have headphones, so that we could just simply just focus on sort of like jamming and letting the speed kind of go where it wants. But over the whole course of this track, we basically wanted it to speed up over time. So at the start, we were, I think, around like 195 BPM, and I think we finished out around like 216, 217 BPM. But yeah, let me just play, I guess, intro, and then through the first solo. So the way we have this set up in this DAW, I use Logic. A lot of people use Pro Tools, but if you're unfamiliar with DAWs, basically everything that's vertical, everything that's stacked on top of each other is happening at the same time. And then as we go left to right, that's basically the passage of time. So yeah, that's basically how this is set up. Even though there's a lot of colors and a lot of tracks, it might seem confusing, but like I explained before, we kind of went between individually tracking during the written parts and then basically jamming, playing together during the solos. And it's set up basically the same way here. So we had all the same microphones. Earlier in the video, we showed the microphone setup for the Taiko set and the Odaiko and all the room microphones and everything. So there was around 8 to 9 microphones in the room recording at all times. So you can see that here when we individually track. So the red is Kyle on Odaiko. So this is all Kyle. So a lot of these ones up close, those are the close mics, and you can see the waveform is bigger. And then the ones after that are a lot of the room mics. And some of the stuff here you see is muted. So those are microphones I ended up not using. So that's what Kyle sounds like, or the Odaiko sounds like just by itself with the room mics. And then down below, you can see me in the baby blue here. This is what I sound like just on my own in the room with the room mics going. And then together. So that's us. And then when we actually transition from this point down to this point, basically, since we're tracking at the same time, the room mics, instead of capturing one of us at a time, the room mics are actually capturing both of us playing at the same time. So we share more mics and we have less mics that are solely individually for us. So we kind of get that bleed sound. In our close mics, we can actually hear the other person. So this is what Kyle's close mic sound like, and here you're gonna actually hear a lot of the Taiko set and his mic. Trying to get rid of that Taiko set from his close mics is actually pretty much impossible. For my close mics for the Taiko set, it was actually easier to take out a lot of the Odaiko, because I ended up hearing a lot less Odaiko in my close mics. And I was able to take a lot of the low end out of the close mics, which I didn't necessarily need for the shime or the okedo. So in the background, you can still hear some of the Odaiko, but it's not as loud as the Taiko set and the Odaiko close mics. This is the room mics that are capturing both me and Kyle playing at the same time. So that basically gives us the space and the size of the room and makes it a little bit more, I guess, cinematic, epic sounding and not so dry. So combining all those elements together, we get this. And just to get rid of some of the ambient sound or unneeded sound from the Taiko set, you can actually see here, I actually took out a lot of the okedo mic stuff, except for when I hit the okedo. That's when I would solo, or not solo it, but I would unmute it for the okedo hits here. But I didn't really need the sound of the okedo. Besides that, I felt that was a little bit unnecessary, and it was some extra sound that I didn't want. Some of the extra stuff that we recorded, just some accessory parts, basically shaker with two hi-hats, two different hi-hat stacks, and then 2 sets of chappa. But this is what these sound like. Yeah, so you could hear the different hi-hats. So there's one, when we go to the written parts, that's solely on the left side. And there's one on the right side. Just to give that wideness on the left and the right. Basically stays out of the way of the Taiko set and the Odaiko. The Odaiko I tried to keep right down the center. It has a lot of like bass and sub information, a lot of low end. And the Taiko set kind of moves around the middle of like middle left all the way towards middle right. So by keeping stuff on the left and right sides, on the extremes, I was able to keep that space away from the main Taiko drums. So that's the hi-hat on the right. And then we had just the shaker parts. And then the chappa at home. And again, there's a like you can see all the edits here. So a lot of these we just did like one take, either in the studio, and basically I could have kept it really raw, natural sounding, and just went with the takes because they sounded like mostly good. But I wanted to keep the parts, the support parts, like really tight. So the Taiko set and the accessory parts I wanted to basically line up pretty much perfectly so that there wasn't as much like timing distraction between the support parts and the main Odaiko part. And then when we go to solos, basically I just did one take, my regular hi-hat stack during the solos, and this was at the studio, and basically tried to match perfectly the tempo. And this is with the Taiko set. So I had 2 shime that I moved between on the Taiko set. One I put sort of a little bit to the left, and one I put a little bit to the right in terms of the stereo image. And I'd switch between the two when I was just playing the G for Kyle on Odaiko. But how I basically added the hi-hat to be a support part was anytime, like let's say I moved to the left shime in the stereo image, I'd put this hi-hat, I'd move it over to the right a little bit, just so I'd get that stereo separation. And then when I'd switch back to the right, let's say on shime, then I'd move the hi-hat to the left. You see, so there's a switch happening at that point there. So the hi-hat starts on a little bit to the left, and then it'll go a little bit to the right here. So that's just a little tiny trick. It might be not noticeable, but that's a little something extra that was added. And then after the whole recording session, pretty much right at the end, we had myself, Kyle, and Jen Caballero from Kaminari Taiko. We just did a pass, stood in sort of like a semicircle, and we just did a pass where we had headphones on and we listened to the whole track that we recorded, and we just basically did a key eye throughout the whole thing. And then it's soloed. So I try to keep basically where we were. So you can hear me on the left, Jen sort of in the middle, and Kyle is on the right. Pretty much everything else was a little like extra production stuff, electronic stuff that I added. But one of the main things I think I wanted to go over was the main Taiko, or sorry, the main Odaiko sounds. A lot of what I did, like on each individual track, I try to keep the low end, because that's where the low end and most of the Taiko portion comes from, is from the Odaiko. You could see in some of the stuff I added, I try to get rid of, frequencies that maybe I didn't like, try to boost some attack, because I mentioned before how, it sounded good in the control room, but when I got back home and started putting some of this stuff together, it didn't have as much of a crunchy mid-range or as much of a slap or clarity or punch, which I didn't feel was representing the Odaiko enough. Because when you're standing next to an Odaiko or in the same room as an Odaiko, like you can really feel the punch and the attack and the power from it. In the headphones, it didn't have quite that much punch. Besides like compression and EQ or like a little bit distortion here and there on some of the tracks. One of the big things I added was this thing called the turbo, which is a trick I stole from Bellow, who's a mostly metal producer, recording engineer. So I'll just solo these. Everything put together, but I'm going to get rid of the one turbo track. I noticed a lot of the power and the punches went missing all of a sudden. So this is what the turbo part sounds like, and it's going to sound pretty kind of bad on its own, but hear me out. But this is what the turbo sounds like. Yeah, so it might sound pretty bad, but basically what I did, I took one of the close mics and just copy and pasted it, and I went down and basically shortened it down to where you just heard mostly the attack of the major hits that Kyle was doing on the Odaiko. I'm pretty sure I compressed it first, and then I distorted it. A lot of what you get is that power and that punch and that click. It makes a huge difference. And it might sound obvious if you have the Odaiko soloed by itself, but with everything, it's there. But once you take it away, it's pretty obvious. So that was kind of a thing that I used on pretty much the whole track. It ended up being a lot of work because I had to manually cut out each individual strike that Kyle did in the whole song, and then do that trick where I compressed it and distorted it and shortened it up. But it was definitely worth it to make it sound a little bit more like ideally how a Odaiko sounds to me. There's a big glitch component in the whole track. So the main ones are during what we call the Meshuggah breaks. And this is where these glitch fills is what I call them. This is where these glitch fills come in. Okay, so this is what they sound like on their own. Yeah, and those really sounded cool to me. Alright, yeah, cool. So you can do these a lot of different ways. I used mostly a stutter edit is what the plugin's called. It's used a lot in more electronic songs. Again, basically what stutter edit does, it just takes audio information. It takes that audio information and it really just cuts it up. And depending on what key you hit at certain times, it might do a stutter like or it might reverse the audio, or it does like a million things. But I just basically did a pass for all those little spaces for the fills, and then just took out my favorite ones, cut it up a lot. You can see up here, like in this range, these are all different glitch edits I did. I just took my favorite little bits and pieces here, just cut them out and then faded them in just so they fit well into the spots. A lot of other producers will do it different ways. There's a electronic producer called Mr. Bill that does a lot of glitchy stuff like this. So he has tutorials on YouTube that you can watch. Those are really great. But you can do similar things basically just by taking, let's say if you have like an Odaiko track, you take the output and you put it either through I think like a bus, and then you can have a different audio track where its input, like what it's hears to record, is from that bus input. So you're basically going Odaiko track, you feed it through a bus, and then you have another audio track that's hearing that bus, and it's recording what that bus is doing. And basically what you do is you alter that, let's say the Odaiko audio, with like a glitch plugin, or just by cycling through different presets on like any like effects driven plugin, and you just cycle through those as it's recording, and you're basically doing like live glitch recording. And you can do the same thing where you like pick your favorite bits and pieces. But there was a reason for doing all these glitch things for like all the fills where there's empty space, and that's for this reason. Maybe we can hear it if I take the glitch parts off. So I believe you should be able to hear the metronome clicking in the background. Do it one more time at this other section. Yeah, so you should be able to hear the clicking metronome in the back. And that was sort of an error that we made, or the headphones that we used weren't exactly isolating, and sometimes we had extra headphones that weren't turned off when we went to go track. So what happened is in the spaces you could hear those metronomes clicking away, so I had to cover them up somehow. I know I want to do glitch stuff with the song, but those glitches ended up working really well as fills that would cover up the metronome sound. So during this section, the Doom section, where the Odaiko's just playing doko 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 as the build-up, I have some stuff for the Taiko set. So those are the okedo in my Taiko set. I copy and pasted them, reversed them. In Logic, you can do this feature where you can do control click and you can do this speed up thing where it basically mimics a tape machine speeding up. And then also I decided to have impacts on the starts of the major sections. So whenever an Odaiko solo would start, I wanted to have a big sort of electronic impact. 3 similar sounding key eyes that me, Jen, and Kyle did. I basically stacked them on top of each other and then had like a stereo delay built in and some distortion. I'll play it one more time. And then in context. And then for that impact, we also had some chappa that are basically doing the similar thing with the slowdown, or the tape slowdown here, but it kind of sounds like a little bit like sort of like a laser or something. It's meant to be just mostly sub information, but with a little like electronic fizzly stuff on the sides. And I think that's it for the impact. So yeah, all together. right in the middle of the song, we basically go into a Taiko set solo for me. That's basically me just playing on my own. I got some advice from Isaku, so thanks, Isaku Kageyama, where I played him part of the song just to get his take on it. And he gave me some good advice where he just said, like, if you're going to do the glitch elements here and there, like, you should really go, 100% with it and not, like, go in halfway and do some electronic stuff here and there. Like, electronic parts should be constantly happening throughout the song just so it feels a little bit more ingrained. So I appreciate that advice, and it made sense, so I kind of took that at heart. So during this Taiko set portion, it was going to be just all raw Taiko set, but I decided it'd be better to have some sort of a build-up here, at least with other sounds. So this creepy sound starts to roll in like about halfway through this Taiko set open solo. So the first thing I added was in the more melodic portion of the song, or during the noisy part, I basically drag this rubber ball mallet across the Taiko, and it kind of creates this whale sound. So I took a little portion of that and just messed it up a little bit. In the mixer here, all the stuff I added, basically compressed it, put it through a couple different distortions and tape machines back to back, just give it that weird tape sound. And then added like EQ to make it a little bit more mid-rangey and more had that telephone effect. And I put basically a reverb on it. But yeah, it was a little bit cool sounding, just creeping in. It's hard, like, you don't really notice at first, but I wanted to be kind of confusing as you're listening to it. And to add another sound, I basically did these weird whisper takes. Yeah, and then added some glitchy stuff at the end there just to keep going with that theme with some other glitchy sounds. So a lot of these like glitchy sounds were made actually in a program called VCV Rack. It's just like a online in the box version of what like modular synthesizers do. But VCV Rack, it's a free program, so that's what a lot of these sounds are. So a lot of them are just like, it's just repeating sounds that are fed through like distortions or delays. Yeah, I'd say that's most of this song. And then at the end, we added basically a big impact strike. We added a huge vocal, like a gang vocal of us all going yo, and then the final hit, which we did, this whole section we did live, as you can see, with Kyle here, me here, and then the room mics. We added some more strikes here just to impact, or to just give that final note some impact. It should be a combination of it, a few different strikes. One of them's like a bass mallet hitting the Odaiko, one of them's atake bachi slapping the Odaiko, and one of them just might be some extra strikes from a different take we did. And then with the gang vocal and me and Kyle playing. Yeah, so that's basically how we recorded low. Some of the tips, some of the tricks I did here. There's just some small stuff like if I whiffed a note or if I missed a note, we took samples of the drums and stuff, so I was able to replace some of those hits. If I needed to make something a little bit more impactful, I might double up and add a sample to it. Like if a shime accent is supposed to be a little bit louder, I would add like a sample behind it, or like a cleaner, more hard-hitting sample, just to make it more impactful. So, it's not the most raw recording. I did a lot of edits and stuff like that, but even though it was just me and Kyle, just two people playing at the same time for the Taiko, I wanted to make it sound a little bit more intimate, pretty powerful, as clean as I could make it, while also adding all of these electronic elements or supporting elements, just to keep it a little bit fresh and a little bit more modern. And I think the juxtaposition of the electronic and the glitchy ambient parts work really well with what we were trying to do in terms of the message we were trying to convey and the feeling we were trying to convey with the song Low in the first place. Okay, so this is another session. So this is the first couple parts of Low. So it's on a different session just because I did this during quarantine, most of this. And once we did the actual Taiko recording, I had trouble putting all the Taiko recording files into the session without messing too much stuff up, so I had to keep it separated. But anyway, let's get into it. Very unorganized, way too many tracks, but that's sort of how I mix while I'm composing. It's all very messy right now. So yeah, we'll play some audio files here and there. Again, just like last time, this might be in mono is how you'll hear it, so you won't hear left and right, but I'll try explaining as we go. So a lot of this stuff I tend to overwrite, so I'd do some little tricks and techniques here to kind of move stuff out of the way, just so everything kind of fit nicely. But anyway, so the beginning just starts off with pretty much just straight up Koto. Again, you'll hear it in mono, but there's one Koto take that's on the left side and one Koto take that's on the right side here. And there's a delay that's put on it, like a dotted eighth note delay, just so it gives it some syncopation. Otherwise, it's just otherwise it's just straight up eighth notes, which is fine, but just add some syncopation here. I just put the delay there. So the way I mic'd this up, I borrowed a Koto from my friend Dave Cheatham, and how I mic'd it is I put an SM57 on the top, pointed at the string part, maybe about a foot away-ish above the Koto, and then I had Electro Voice RE20 was on the bottom and it was pointed into the hole that's on the bottom of the Koto just to get that bassy sound. So here's what the bottom mics sound like. So this is the RE20. And this is the top mics, the SM57. But the top mics are kind of getting that, just that really treble, area of the string noise and the string attack. But surprisingly, the bottom mic, which was pointed like almost close to inside the Koto, picked up a really nice sound, actually. Nice full sound. Again, I got rid of a lot of the sub information and some of the really, really bassy stuff that I didn't need. So I'll start with the bottom mics, and then I'll add the top mics. And it just fills it out, gives it a little bit more presence. And then with that, I also have a take of the Koto that's just an octave down, just to give it some of that bassy, full-bodied sound. And with that going, I also have, during a lot of this part, I have something I'm just calling the plinky beep delay verb. Very professional sounding name. But this is just sort of like a synth part that I came up with in the modular system that I was talking about before, the VCV rack. And it was just meant to be sort of like an alternate melodic part to basically juxtapose with the really natural sounding Koto. And it just follows the chords in the song. So it sounds a little bit grainy. So that's just how it was recorded in VCV Rack. Since I did this over quarantine, I decided it would be the best to try out doing some singing for the first time. So, but I think it ended up working out for the best. A lot of the percussion, though, was recorded in the recording studio. So when we get to the Taiko here with the hi-hat, the chucks from the, or the shicks from the hi-hat closing, and then the shaker parts here, these were all recorded in the studio. There's also some cymbal scrapes here and some sus cymbal rolling. So before we get to the singing, some of the keyboard parts that I had originally were this flute patch and this choir patch, which I'll play a little bit of. So I tried to make them a little bit more sounding like a mellotron, like a little bit older, like Beatles, sounding like fake flutes, fake choir. And the tracks on the left here are actually labeled wrong, so don't look at those. But that was the flute patch. And then when we get to the chorus, it goes into more of a choir library here. Just to make it a little bit more epic sounding. We also recorded this low bass mallet, or bass drum mallet, excuse me, hitting the Odaiko, which sounded really cool. I also forgot to mention in the percussion part, the chappa. But this was one of the first more melodic songs that I wrote that ended up being playable in a live setting. And I really liked the chord progression, and I liked the sort of count structure that was in the song, because it's just changing constantly between a count of 8, count of 9 for this whole beginning portion. And it's like once you get that feeling, it's like it's second nature. But at first, it's a little bit it's not super clear what the count isn't, or what the time signature is, but it still feels almost like cyclical, and I think it grooves pretty well. I think it's pretty natural with the style of the song. And then when we get to a lot of the singing portion, I decided to make it a little bit more complex, maybe to cover up some of my mistakes here and there. And some of the glitchy fade-in parts that you'll hear, again, were done in VCV rack, where I just took syllables or words, and then just fed them through like reverbs or reverse reverbs, delays, stuff like that.
Asleep in the skin, I'll breathe again. Know that rest on the selfless thin disguise.
There's 2 verses, 2 choruses. Main verse, the main part is single tracked, but I used a combo of the Electro Voice RE20 and my SM57. One of them was a little bit more bassy, which you can hear. It's got like a nice bass presence to it, but it doesn't sound that exciting. And then the SM57 was actually more the opposite. It was a little bit brighter, but it wasn't as full. So combining the two together, you get a bigger sound. But the verse the main part was single tracked, so just one take, along with the electronic sort of like fade-in parts that were done in VCV rack, along with like little texture parts here and there where I'd either whisper or I'd do an octave down. You might not hear it, with the full song, but it adds like a texture.
Guys, see me.
But with everything,
You see me. I'll breathe
it just adds a nice color to it. And then when we get to the chorus, I do the main vocal double tracked.
and break me away.
And you can't hear it, but again, it's one take is to the left and one Taiko's to the right just to create that stereo effect. But I also added some more choral components. I'll just play those. They're a little bit cringy on their own. But these are harmonies just to make it sound a little bit more like a full choir of Grady's. So I'll play it with everything this time. And the vocoder is just there's like kind of built into Logic. If you ever listen to Daft Punk, you know, it's very reminiscent to that kind of sound. And it's just like little textures here and there, just really add like some significance and some width to the main vocal, just to beef it up a little bit more, make it a little bit more epic. Because I'm not the best singer in the world. I tried and I did a million takes and I got somewhere that's, acceptable, I guess, for me. The one little trick I did, and I think it was just at the end there, going into more of like a distorted sound towards the end. And what I did for this was, I was just trying things out, but I ended up taking basically a bounce of this section of the song, recording it onto like an actual cassette tape, and then putting it into my cassette player, taking one of my mics, and then recording it back into the session. So it I was taking the whole song, putting it through a cassette player, and then recording it back into the session to get that legit like cassette sound. It kind of makes it a little bit more telephone, mid-rangey sounding, and brings it a little bit closer to the center. Just so when it opens back up again, it sounds nice. So that's the main parts of the song. Because there's so many parts, though, what helped a lot, besides like EQ and taking out frequencies that you don't really need, is I use a lot of sidechain compression. Whenever the vocal comes in, that should be heard easily. And then there's kind of like another list of priorities after the main voice. So after the main vocals, then it'd be sort of like Koto, along with, if there's backing vocals, those should be together. And then below that is more of the synth part. So like the plinky synth part, along with down at the bottom there, along with that plinky synth, should be sort of like the flute patch and the choir patch. So you can kind of see at the bottom here, I'm using like a lot of the sidechain compression stuff. So for the plinky synth, I have like 2 side chains. And basically what sidechain does is, if I'm sidechaining the plinky verb to something that I think is higher on the priority list than this. And basically what it does, as you can see here, and this is a Waves plugin called the C6 sidechain compressor, is anytime something in bus 7 up here or bus 3 goes off in the mix or becomes louder, it'll actually push down the volume of the high end here, which I have selected for this. So so it's moving along with bus 3. You can see how it's moving down as the Koto is striking, and that makes more room for the Koto in the higher end, just so too many things aren't competing for the same frequency range. And it's also sidechaining to bus 7, which is the vocal. So anytime the vocal comes in, this little notch here in the 1K, 2K hertz range will actually decrease as well. So you can see how it's ducking to make room for whatever the priority is. This is the flute and the choir bus, and they're sidechained to the backing vocals. So anytime there's like a harmony or a texture, the whole range above like 250 hertz all the way up to 20K will get reduced down just a little bit, just to make room on the high end for those. And there's also flute and choir is also side chaining to the main vocals. See, when the vocal lets up here, you can see how it comes back up. And when it activates again, it gets dropped down. So it's just making room, and that helps with really thick mixes like this. I'd usually do that sidechain trick rather than permanently like reduce a part of the EQ or a part of the frequency range of that instrument. I didn't want it, permanently reduced for the whole song. So if I wanted it temporarily reduced, just to make room for something that was more important, I'd do a lot of the sidechaining, which helps a lot. So going into the second portion is the ambient portion, and this was just creating a lot of different sounds, and it's very kind of like horror movie sounding type stuff. And a lot of it was just finding room in the stereo field, so I'd move a lot of things around, which you won't be able to hear unless you listen to the actual song, because it'll sound like it's in mono here. But picking and choosing different sounds where they should be, just to make a cool atmosphere. So here I did some bowing. I just got like a bow that you'd use for like a violin or a viola, and just ran it across the koto in different parts just to make noise. And I'd do the same thing actually for a cymbal. And then I'd add different like reverbs to it, just to move it around a little bit, give it its own unique space. And then I also ran a pick, like a guitar pick, across the koto strings. And then everything pretty much in this section is actually moving around the stereo field, just to make it a little bit more ambient and spooky, I guess. And then also had a modular sound here. Yeah, so that was a cool sound. And then the one thing I experimented a lot with was actually throat singing. So I'm definitely nowhere near as good as like Shoji Kometa or Masato Maz Baba with the throat singing stuff, but I dabble, I partake a little bit. And we did this during performances. Actually, I think just the first ITI, when we did a different song, I did some of the throat singing stuff, but I wanted to try to do it here. And I ended up having the idea that the throat singing, you could throat sing at different pitches. It's not super clear, but you can do it. So I wondered if I could actually make chords that would, the same chords that I used at the first section of the song, and try to recreate those with throat singing. There's a really big reverb on those. Yeah, just wanted to let that die down a little bit. So, and these are different notes. I can't hear actually the playback here, but just going off each one, these should be in pairs, and then they're, separated between left and right. So I'll get rid of the delay for now. So that's the second pair, third pair. And one of these is actually a sung upper part that is just like snuck in a little bit. It's not too loud, but it adds a little bit more of a pitch, real clear like pitch bass to the chords. But yeah, all these together create something really cool, and the delay makes it sound even more cinematic. And this is something I added as a spoken word part here.
Blank seasons dissolve through me. Words fail across my teeth. Glimpse this piece of storm-brought view. Sordid red.
So it's supposed to be a little bit esoteric and, dark sounding. And I mess with a lot, different compressors, some some distortions. I use Supercharger GT a lot. Isotope Trash for distortion. But I also did some takes with megaphones, but I'll just play. So this is kind of more the really compressed, low-end, heavy spoken word take.
Blank seasons dissolve through me. Words fail across my teeth.
But to give it some more like real distortion and kind of space, I added these megaphone takes. So I would repeat the spoken word, and I did one take in the room I'm in now with a megaphone from across the room, and then I did another take from basically outside this room and up the stairs a little bit.
Blank seasons dissolve through me. Words fail across my teeth. Glimpse this piece of storm-brought view. Blank seasons dissolve through me. As words fail across my teeth.
So yeah, all that sounds cool. And while that's going on, too, I have the rubber ball take. So this is a rubber ball mallet being rubbed against the Odaiko, creating sort of like a whale sound. And just like everything else, I mess with the audio, moving it from one side to the other, giving it more and less reverb so that it sounds like it's moving around in a big room. And then during this part, I also had Kyle play some little, fue sections here and there. And then finally, during this section, there's like the big build-up, the big scream build-up that should introduce us or pushes us into the Taiko section at the beginning. So these are just takes, manipulated takes of me, Jen, and Kyle sort of all screaming together, but messed up. And I copy and pasted this a few times and like really compressed it, or add distortion, or moved it from left to right, or added like a phase shifter. I forget what else I did. Oh yeah, like a bit crusher or stuff like that. Finally, to end the piece, I just wanted to go back to Koto and just finish it off with just straight up Koto with a little melody right in the center, and the two Koto on the left and right, they're just playing, again, they're playing the root notes, and the melody, Koto melody, kind of mimics some of the vocal phrases, some of the vocal melodies from in the first part of the song. But, it's just supposed to be a little bit more somber and raw there. And then, of course, in my fashion, in my MO, I end on an unresolved note, which I love to do. And that just fades out from there. But yeah, this is the other parts of the song. Sort of the mixes I did. I use sidechain compression a lot and just sort of mess with different sounds, trying to make it a little bit more electronic, a little bit more epic. Yeah, so that's it for the first couple sections of Low.